Idi Amin in Saudi Arabia, Exile, Silence, and Final Words when Field Marshal Idi Amin Uganda, the notorious former president of Uganda, was overthrown in April 1979. He fled into exile, never to return to power or even step foot in Uganda again. His chosen place of exile, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, offered him a life of both sanctuary and seclusion, while the world remembered him for his brutal rule marked by ethnic cleansing, human rights violations, and erratic behavior. His final years were lived in obscurity. Behind the scenes, Amin remained a deeply religious man, surrounded by his family, aging in silence. In his final days, he spoke in Swahili to his children, urging them to stay together and let no one divide you, a poignant echo of a man who had once divided a nation, now calling for unity in his family. This essay explores Idi Amin's life. In exile, his adaptation to Saudi Arabia, how he coped with political irrelevance, and the emotional legacy he left to his family, particularly through his last words, flight from Uganda and arrival in Saudi. Idi Amin ruled Uganda from 1971 to 1979, a period during which an estimated 300,000 people were killed, thousands were tortured, and the economy collapsed following the expulsion of the Asian community in 1972. His downfall began with the failed invasion of Tanzania in late 1978. Tanzanian forces, along with Ugandan exiles, retaliated and captured Kampala on April 11, 1979, forcing Amin to flee. He first escaped to Libya, where Muammar Gaddafi received him briefly. However, Amin's stay was short-lived, as he was deemed a liability. He then traveled to Iraq, where Saddam Hussein also kept him at a distance. Ultimately, Saudi Arabia, under King Khalid, granted him asylum on humanitarian and religious grounds, with the understanding that Amin would refrain from political activity. In Jeddah, Amin was received not as a fallen dictator, but as a Muslim brother. He had converted to Islam in his youth and presented himself as a devout Muslim leader during his presidency. The Saudi royal family, though aware of his dark legacy, saw the benefit of offering him sanctuary in line with Islamic tradition to protect fellow Muslims, especially those who sought refuge. Life in Jeddah, a gilded cage from the moment Amin arrived in Jeddah. He lived under strict conditions. The Saudi government provided him with a lavish villa, monthly stipend, security, and access to medical services, but his movements were limited, and he was prohibited from engaging in political discourse. His residence was located in the Al-Hamra district of Jeddah, a quiet and secure neighborhood. Here, he lived with his 4 wives and many of his over 40 children, depending on the time period. He maintained a routine centered around prayer, Quran recitation, walking in his compound, and reading. Though he was sometimes spotted in public places like shopping centers or mosques, he was mostly withdrawn from public life. Idi Amin never publicly apologized for his past. In fact, in interviews during the 1980s and early 1990s, he remained unapologetic, insisting that his actions were in Uganda's best interest. Yet privately, he appeared to mellow with age. Reports suggest he was increasingly introspective, especially after the death of some of his children and the global condemnation of his legacy. Attempts at a return and continued influence throughout the 1980s and early 1990s, Amin remained politically irrelevant. Still, rumors of his possible return would occasionally surface, especially as Uganda went through further turmoil under subsequent governments. Some Ugandan politicians feared that Amin could use his charisma and past military connections to stage a comeback, though in reality, he had neither the health nor international backing. In 1993, Amin attempted to travel back to Uganda, allegedly planning to settle in his ancestral home in Arua. However, the government of President Yoweri Museveni barred his entry, declaring Amin would have to face justice for his crimes. Interestingly, in exile, Idi Amin still commanded loyalty among some sections of Ugandans, particularly in northern Uganda, where his support base originally lay. His image remained controversial. While urban elites saw him as a tyrant, others, especially in rural regions, remembered him for restoring Ugandan pride, promoting African culture, and challenging Western imperialism. Family life and religious devotion. Idi Amin's exile years were defined by religious devotion and a deep connection with his family. He had over 7 known wives, but by the time he was in Saudi Arabia, he lived with 4, following Islamic law. His children described him as a loving but strict father, with a strong sense of discipline and family unity. Amin's youngest children received education in Saudi Arabia and Europe. Some of his sons became businessmen, while others entered public service or politics. Idi Amin, one of his older sons, served briefly in the Uganda government in later years, and Jafar Amin, who later returned to Uganda, became a public speaker, defending his father's memory while also acknowledging his faults. In Saudi Arabia, Amin spent hours in prayer, attended the mosque regularly, and even gave informal religious teachings to his household. His devotion to Islam intensified with age, and by the 1990s, he was visibly frail and struggling with diabetes, hypertension, and other age-related complications. Final illness and death in 2003. In July 2003, Idi Amin was hospitalized at King Faisal Specialist Hospital in Jeddah. He had slipped into a coma due to kidney failure. As news of his condition reached Uganda and the international press, debates emerged over whether he should be allowed to return home to die. President Museveni refused the request, stating that Amin would have to answer for his crimes if he returned. Human rights groups and families of Amin's victims opposed any repatriation. Amin's family stood by him in hospital. In the final days of his life, he became weak but conscious enough to speak. According to multiple family members, he called his children and spoke to them in Swahili, a language he had used in military and home settings. His last words to them were, "Kenny pamoja, sikubali mtu awagwani. Mimi nimefanya makosa yangu, lakini ninyi sisifanye kosa hilo. Kenny pamoja kama familia. Stay together. Don't let anyone divide you. I have made my mistakes, but do not repeat them. Stay united as a family." These words reflected a man confronting mortality, acknowledging his errors indirectly, and entrusting his legacy to his children. His statement about unity came from a man who had ruled through division, tribal favoritism, and fear, yet now urged love, togetherness, and reconciliation. Idi Amin died on August 16, 2003, aged approximately 78, and was buried in Jeddah in a simple ceremony attended by family and a few close acquaintances. No Ugandan government representatives were present. Legacy. Between condemnation and reassessment, Idi Amin remains one of Africa's most controversial figures. To most historians, he was a tyrant, responsible for horrific atrocities, mismanagement, and international embarrassment. His rule devastated Uganda politically and economically, and his name became synonymous with brutality and buffoonery. However, others view his legacy more complexly. Amin was among the first African leaders to openly challenge British colonial remnants, promote Africanization, and speak unapologetically against Western dominance. His Pan-African rhetoric, military nationalism, and support for Palestine won him support across parts of the Arab world and Africa, yet none of this erases the mass killings, ethnic persecution, or economic destruction he oversaw. What his last words suggest is that in exile, Amin reflected on the cost of division, perhaps recognizing that the family unity he now cherished had been absent in the national leadership he once wielded. Conclusion. I Amin's life in Saudi Arabia was a dramatic contrast to his flamboyant presidency. From palace banquets and military parades in Kampala, he retired into quiet prayers and family dinners in Jeddah. Stripped of power, Amin was left only with his faith, memories, and children. His final words in Swahili, urging his children to stay unite, it offer a rare glimpse of a man once feared, now reduced to a father confronting death and legacy. While Uganda moved on, Amin's shadow remains. His life in Saudi Arabia is not just the story of a dictator in exile, but a cautionary tale of power, downfall, and the human need for redemption at the very end.